Don't touch him. He will react. Ethan Walker's warning came 1 second before the German Shepherd drove his shoulder into a rolling medicine cart and sent it crashing across the veteran's hospital hallway. Metal trays struck the floor. A glass bottle shattered. Nurses jumped back. A security officer reached for the radio on his chest. At the center of the sudden chaos, Ranger stood rigid, chest heaving, ears locked forward, his dark eyes fixed not on the people around him, but on the closed door of room 312. Then came the sound. A faint, broken gasp from inside. Ranger lunged toward the door, claws scraping against the polished floor. Ethan caught the handle of his harness, but the old K9 pulled with a strength that did not belong to his 11-year-old body. "Open it," Ethan said. The nurse nearest the door hesitated. "That room is empty." Ranger struck the door once with both front paws. Ethan's voice dropped into the tone he had once used when hesitation could cost lives. "Open it now." The nurse pushed inside. Behind the privacy curtain, an elderly veteran lay half out of his wheelchair, one hand trapped beneath him, the call button on the floor. His oxygen line had twisted around the wheel. He had been unable to shout. For 3 stunned seconds, nobody moved. Then the hallway erupted into action. Ranger backed away without a command. He sat beside Ethan, still watching until the man's breathing steadied and the nurses lifted him safely into bed. Everyone in the hallway had seen a dangerous dog moments earlier. Now they were staring at the animal who had heard what none of them had heard. But one woman was not staring. She was watching Ranger's breathing. Before we continue, tell us what city or state you are listening from, and share what loyalty means to you. Subscribe for more stories about courage, healing, and the extraordinary bond between people and K9s. Claire Bennett lowered the folder in her hands and studied the German Shepherd from several feet away. She wore navy scrubs beneath a gray cardigan, and her hospital badge identified her as a rehabilitation nurse. While the others whispered about the broken cart, Claire noticed the slight tremor in Ranger's back leg. She noticed the white fur around his muzzle and the way his weight shifted away from his left hip. Most of all, she noticed that he did not look proud of what he had done. He looked tired. Ethan noticed her noticing. He was 42, broad-shouldered, quiet, and dressed in a worn canvas jacket that had faded at the elbows. People at the hospital knew he had been a Navy SEAL captain. They knew he had spent nearly 2 decades in uniform, and that Ranger had served beside him for 7 of those years. They did not know why Ethan rarely entered a room unless he could see every exit. They did not know why he slept with the porch light on, or why he sometimes stood in the grocery store staring at shelves without remembering what he had come to buy. They also did not know that Ranger had been retired for 3 years and was no longer certified to work inside a medical facility. That detail mattered now. A hospital security supervisor named Nolan Pierce stepped through the crowd. He was a careful man in his early 50s with silver hair, a measured voice, and the permanent tension of someone responsible for preventing every disaster before it happened. "Captain Walker," he said, "I understand the dog helped Mr. Larkin, and I am grateful. But he also caused a serious disturbance." Ethan kept one hand on Ranger's harness. He alerted. He overturned a cart in a public hallway. Because nobody heard the man inside. Nolan's jaw tightened. "That does not change our animal access policy." The words landed harder than Ethan expected. Ranger was not merely a dog he brought along. Ranger was the reason Ethan could enter crowded buildings without turning around. He was the warm weight beside the bed when nightmares woke him before dawn. He was the quiet set of eyes that pulled Ethan back when memory and the present blurred together. "I have documentation," Ethan said. "For a retired service K9, not an active assistance animal. He is trained. I am not disputing that." "Then what are you disputing?" Nolan looked at the wrecked cart, then at the frightened faces nearby. "Whether training from years ago guarantees safe behavior today." "Rangers." Ears shifted toward Nolan's voice, but he did not rise. Claire stepped forward. His behavior was controlled. Nolan turned. "You saw the cart." "I saw a targeted alert followed by an immediate release." He did not redirect toward a person. He did not snap, bark, or continue once the door opened. Ethan looked at her for the first time. Claire continued. "He also appears to be compensating for pain in his left hip. That can make sudden movements harder to control." Nolan's expression softened only slightly. "I respect your observation, but this is not your department." "No," Claire said. "It is my hallway, though, and Mr. Larkin is one of my patients." The old veteran inside room 312 called weakly from his bed. Let the dog stay. A few nurses smiled. Nolan did not. I will allow today's appointment, he said to Ethan. After that, Ranger cannot return without a formal behavioral evaluation and written approval. Ethan's fingers tightened around the harness. Ranger leaned against his leg. The contact was small, almost invisible, but Ethan understood. It was the same signal Ranger had given him in crowded streets overseas, in aircraft vibrating through darkness, and in the silent kitchen at 2 in the morning when Ethan's hands would not stop shaking. Stay still. Breathe. Decide. Ethan nodded once. Fine. Nolan walked away, already speaking into his radio about the broken cart. The crowd slowly dispersed. Claire remained where she was. You should have him examined, she said. Ethan looked down at Ranger. He has arthritis. We manage it. That is not the only thing I noticed. Ethan's posture changed. What else? When he pulled toward the room, his left leg almost folded. He hid it quickly. He has always hidden pain. So have most of the veterans in this building. The answer was gentle, but it reached him. Claire did not approach Ranger. She did not bend over him or offer a hand to sniff. Instead, she crouched several feet away, turned her body slightly to the side, and looked at the floor rather than directly into his eyes. You had a difficult morning, she said softly. Ranger's ears moved. Ethan watched closely. Ranger ignored strangers who spoke to him. He tolerated doctors. He obeyed Ethan. But he did not seek attention, and he had not moved willingly toward a new person in years. Claire sat back on her heels and waited. Ranger looked at Ethan. Ethan gave no command. The German shepherd rose slowly. His left hip dipped. He crossed the space between them one careful step at a time, stopping just beyond Claire's reach. She did not touch him. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Ranger lowered his head and placed his nose near the hospital badge hanging from her neck. Claire's breath caught. Ranger inhaled once, then again. His ears tipped forward. A strange softness entered his face, followed by something Ethan had seen only when the dog recognized a familiar route or the sound of an old command. Memory. Ranger took one more step and pressed his shoulder lightly against Claire's knee. Ethan felt the floor shift beneath the life he understood. That is unusual, he said. Claire's eyes glistened, though she smiled. Maybe I smell like antiseptic and bad coffee. He has met thousands of people who smell like antiseptic and bad coffee. Ranger remained beside her. Claire finally lifted one hand, stopping halfway. She looked at Ethan for permission. He almost said no. The word rose from years of habit. Protect the dog. Control the distance. Prevent the mistake. He had built his entire life after retirement around reducing risk. No crowds unless necessary. No visitors without warning. No unfamiliar dogs. No surprises. It kept Ranger safe. It kept Ethan from feeling how small their world had become. He nodded. Claire touched 2 fingers to the side of Ranger's neck, below the collar, where the fur was thick and warm. Ranger closed his eyes. It lasted only a moment. Then Ethan called him back, and Ranger returned immediately. But as they walked toward the elevator, the German shepherd looked over his shoulder at Claire 3 separate times. Ethan counted every one. The appointment was supposed to be routine, but Dr. Priya Shah asked questions Ethan had spent years avoiding. She asked about headaches, sleep, memory, and the morning his neighbor found him standing in a running garage with no idea how long he had been there. Ethan called it exhaustion. Dr. Shah called it a warning. His scans showed no immediate emergency, but she suspected dissociative episodes intensified by trauma and lack of sleep. She recommended more testing and therapy. Ethan agreed to the tests and refused the therapy. Ranger lifted his head beneath the examination table. I know, Ethan muttered. Afterward, Claire handed him the name of a veterinarian experienced with retired working dogs. Ethan said he would consider it. Ranger nudged the paper with his nose. He votes yes, Claire said. You are both becoming difficult. The veterinary specialist, Dr. Lena Ortiz, confirmed that Ranger's arthritis had worsened and that the hallway alert had strained a ligament. He needed medication, shorter walks, and controlled rehabilitation. He hates being idle, Ethan said. Then give him a new job, Lena answered. Retirement is not the absence of purpose. It is a change in purpose. At home, Ethan found the old and signed note that had arrived in Ranger's transfer file years earlier. Some dogs follow commands. This one follows truth. Do not punish him when he sees what you cannot. He had carried those words across deployments and into retirement without knowing who wrote them. That night, as Ranger limped toward the door and looked in the direction of the hospital, Ethan wondered whether the dog's reaction to Claire belonged to a story that had begun before either of them understood it. 3 days later, Claire called. Ethan almost did not answer the unfamiliar number. When he did, her voice sounded tighter than it had in the hospital. "I am sorry to bother you," she said. "Mr. Larkin has stopped cooperating with therapy. What does that have to do with me? He keeps asking for Ranger." Ethan looked toward the living room. Ranger was asleep near the window. "Nolan will not allow him back. I spoke with Nolan. He agreed to a supervised visit in the outdoor rehabilitation garden, after hours, if you are willing." Ethan said nothing. Claire continued. "Mr. Larkin lost his wife 6 months ago. His son lives across the country. He told me Ranger was the first thing that made him feel useful since the stroke. Ranger found him. That does not make him responsible for healing him." "No," Claire said. "But maybe being needed would help both of them." Ethan looked at the orthopedic instructions on the table. "Give him a new job." "What time?" The garden sat behind the oldest wing of the hospital. It had raised flower beds, wide concrete paths, and a row of benches beneath oak trees. The July heat had softened by early evening. Cicadas buzzed from the branches. Mr. Larkin waited in a wheelchair with one hand resting uselessly in his lap. His name was Samuel, and he had served in Vietnam. He wore a faded baseball cap decorated with unit pins and pretended not to be emotional when Ranger entered through the gate. "There he is," Samuel said. Ranger slowed. Ethan kept the leash loose. "Easy." Samuel's good hand trembled as he lowered it. Ranger approached without touching him. He sat beside the wheelchair and leaned gently against Samuel's knee. The old veteran's face folded. "I had a shepherd when I came home," he whispered. "My wife found him at a shelter. Meanest-looking dog in the county. Slept beside our baby's crib every night." Claire stood a few feet away, giving him privacy. Samuel stroked Ranger's neck. "I thought I had forgotten his name." "What was it?" Ethan asked. "Major." Samuel laughed through tears. "Terrible name. Great dog." Ranger remained still while Samuel practiced lifting his weak arm. The first attempt failed. The second reached only a few inches. On the third, his fingertips touched Ranger's shoulder. Claire crouched beside the wheelchair. "That counts." Samuel shook his head. "Barely." Ranger raised his paw and placed it against Samuel's shoe. The old man looked at Ethan. "He arguing with me? He has strong opinions." By the end of the visit, Samuel had completed more exercises than he had in the previous week. Nolan watched from the hospital doorway. He did not smile, but he did not end the session either. After Samuel returned inside, Claire sat on a bench while Ethan walked Ranger slowly around the garden. The dog stopped near an overgrown path leading behind the old wing. A chain blocked the entrance. Beyond it, ivy covered a brick archway. Ranger stared into the shadows. "Not that way," Ethan said. The dog leaned forward. Claire rose from the bench. "What is it?" "I do not know." She came closer but stopped when Ranger's breathing changed. He was not tracking an animal. His nose moved slowly through the air, drawing in scent. His ears shifted toward a sound too faint for Ethan to hear. Ranger stepped toward the chain. Ethan shortened the leash. "Leave it." The command was clear. Ranger stopped, but he did not look away. Claire stood beside Ethan. "That path leads to the old therapy courtyard. Why is it closed?" "The building was damaged years ago. Water, mold, electrical problems. They sealed most of it before I started working here." Ranger gave a low sound in his throat. Not a growl. A question. Claire's face had gone pale. "You know something?" Ethan said. "My father used to take me there." Ethan turned toward her. She looked through the archway. "I was 16. He ran a small program with veterans and dogs. I only visited a few times." Ranger pulled once, gently but insistently. Claire whispered. "There was a young shepherd." The garden seemed to become silent around them. "What shepherd?" Ethan asked. "I do not know. I barely remember. He had been removed from a training group because he stopped responding after a loud noise exercise. My father said the dog was not refusing. He was overwhelmed." Ranger's body had become perfectly still. Claire looked at him, then at Ethan. "I used to sit near him and read." "What did you read?" "Anything. School books. Magazines. Once I read the same baseball article 6 times because it was all I had." Ranger turned toward her voice. Claire's hand covered her mouth. Ethan felt the note in his pocket as though it had suddenly become hot. How old was the dog? Maybe a year. Dark face. One white mark under his chin. Ethan knelt and lifted Ranger's muzzle. Beneath the gray, under his jaw, was a narrow white patch shaped like a crooked line. Claire began to cry without making a sound. Ranger moved toward her. Ethan released the leash. The German shepherd pressed his head against her chest. Claire wrapped both arms around him, careful, of his hip, and buried her face in his fur. This time, Ethan did not count the seconds. He looked beyond them at the chained path and felt the past opening like a door. The next morning, Claire brought a box of photographs to the hospital cafeteria. Ethan arrived before sunrise because he had not slept. Ranger lay beneath the table on a padded mat. Claire spread the photographs between 2 cups of coffee. Most were ordinary family pictures. A younger Claire with braces. Her father, Thomas Bennett, standing beside veterans at picnics. A black and tan German shepherd named Scout sleeping beneath a Christmas tree. Then Claire found a photograph with bent corners. A teenage girl sat on a concrete step reading from a magazine. Several feet away, a young German shepherd lay with his chin on his paws. The dog's body was tense, but his eyes were fixed on the girl. Ethan knew those eyes. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had written, Claire and R, 17, learning that silence can be safe. R, 17, Ethan said. Claire nodded. The dogs did not have full names yet. Ranger lifted his head at the sound of the letter and number. Ethan pulled the folded note from his jacket and placed it beside the photograph. Claire read it once. Then again. Some dogs follow commands. This one follows truth. Do not punish him when he sees what you cannot. My father wrote this, she said. You are sure? He made his capital T like that. And he always used the word truth when he talked about animals. Ethan leaned back. For 14 years, that note had followed him across continents, through retirement, and into the quietest rooms of his life. The unknown person who understood Ranger before Ethan did was sitting in an old photograph beside the woman Ranger had recognized in a hospital hallway. Why did the program end, he asked. Claire gathered the photographs into a careful stack. Officially, funding. Unofficially, there was an incident. What kind? A dog panicked during a demonstration. Nobody was seriously hurt, but a volunteer fell and broke his arm. The hospital suspended the program. My father believed the animal had reacted to faulty wiring behind a wall. He kept asking for an inspection. Was there one? I do not know. A few weeks later, part of the old wing flooded. The program never reopened. Ethan studied her face. And your father? He left the hospital the following year. He died when I was 23. I am sorry. Claire nodded. He had cancer. He spent the last months organizing papers because he said stories disappear when nobody protects them. After he died, I could not open most of the boxes. Ranger placed his chin on Claire's shoe. She looked down. Apparently he disagrees with avoidance. He has no respect for emotional boundaries. That must be difficult for you. Ethan almost smiled. Nolan entered the cafeteria carrying a folder. He stopped when he saw Ranger, then approached. The behavior evaluation is scheduled for Friday, he said. Dr. Ortiz agreed to participate. Ethan nodded. Nolan noticed the photographs. His eyes paused on Thomas Bennett. You knew Claire's father? Ethan asked. Nolan's expression became guarded. Everyone who worked here then knew Thomas. He believed Ranger was part of the old companion program. Nolan looked at the dog. Many dogs passed through that courtyard. This one remembers it. Nolan closed the folder in his hands. Memory is not documentation. Claire's voice sharpened. The photograph is documentation. It proves you sat near a dog labeled R17. The markings match. Perhaps. Ethan stood. What are you afraid of? Nolan looked at him for a long moment. A preventable injury. That is your job. It is personal. Claire's expression changed. Nolan placed the folder on the table. My younger brother was the volunteer who broke his arm during that demonstration. The anger in the room shifted shape. He was 19, Nolan continued. He wanted to be a trainer. The dog knocked him down when an alarm sounded. Thomas insisted the animal had reacted to an electrical fault. My family heard excuses. My brother never worked with dogs again. Ethan looked at Ranger. Was the dog R17? I do not know. Did your brother? He died 12 years ago. Car accident. Nolan's voice remained controlled, but grief sat beneath every word. Claire lowered her eyes. I am sorry. So am I, Nolan said. But sympathy does not remove risk. I watched my mother blame herself for letting him volunteer. I watched Thomas defend a program while my brother learned to use his hand again. I decided then that good intentions are not enough. Ethan understood him better than he wanted to. Nolan pushed the evaluation folder toward him. Ranger passes. He may return under supervision. He fails. He stays off hospital property. No exceptions. He left before either of them answered. Claire stared at the old photograph. My father never told me who was injured. Maybe he was protecting you. Or protecting himself. Ethan sat again. Good people can be wrong. She looked at him. Do you think he was? I think we need facts. Ranger rose and faced the cafeteria door through which Nolan had disappeared. His ears were forward, but his body remained calm. Ethan touched the dog's shoulder. And I think we need to stop turning him into the answer to every question. The evaluation took place in the hospital garden under the observation of Dr. Ortiz, Nolan, Claire, and an independent behaviorist. Ranger moved calmly past wheelchairs, dropped objects, unfamiliar people, and sudden motion. Then a tool struck a metal ladder near the chained entrance to the old courtyard. Ranger froze. His pupils widened. His breathing stopped. One back foot slid away from the sound. Ranger. Eyes, Ethan commanded. The dog did not look at him. Ethan felt the old instinct to push harder, to prove that his voice alone could pull Ranger out of any memory. Then he saw the tremor in the dog's injured leg. He looked at Claire. Speak. She sat on the bench and began reciting the baseball article she had read to R:17 as a teenager. In 1998, a rookie shortstop walked into spring training carrying 2 gloves and no guarantee he would make the team. Ranger's ears moved. Claire continued in the same slow rhythm. The German shepherd turned toward her voice. Ranger, Ethan said more softly. Eyes. This time, Ranger looked at him. He crossed the test area and pressed his chest against Ethan's knee. The behaviorist marked the recovery as controlled and non-aggressive. Nolan approved 2 supervised outdoor visits each week, with Claire as staff sponsor. He still prohibited access to the old courtyard. The visits soon became the center of Ranger's week. Samuel lifted his weak arm farther when Ranger waited beside the rail. Angela Ruiz, a Marine who had avoided group therapy, began reading aloud while the dog rested near her chair. Caleb Brooks, a young Army medic frightened by sudden noise, learned to slow his breathing by matching Ranger's chest. The dog's new purpose was quieter than his old work, but it mattered just as much. One afternoon, Caleb dropped a metal water bottle during a breathing exercise. The crash echoed against the brick walls. Caleb flinched so violently that his chair scraped backward. Ranger flinched too. For a heartbeat, the veteran and the dog faced the same invisible threat. Ethan prepared to intervene, but Ranger moved first. He lowered his body, crossed the space between them, and sat with his back against Caleb's shins. The contact gave the young medic something solid to feel. I scared him, Caleb whispered. No, Ethan said. The sound scared both of you. Caleb's hand hovered above Ranger's shoulders. Then why did he come closer? Because fear does not always tell him to run. Ranger's breathing was still fast. Caleb matched it until both rhythms slowed. Claire watched Ethan as carefully as she watched the patient. He had not commanded Ranger. He had allowed the dog to choose. That difference would have been impossible for him a month earlier. Later, Claire found Ethan cleaning mud from Ranger's leash near the garden sink. You trusted him, she said. I always trust him. You trusted him without controlling what he did. Ethan kept his eyes on the buckle. There is a difference. You are beginning to discover one. He dried the leash and looked through the window at Ranger sleeping beside Caleb's chair. For years, control kept people alive. I know. Letting go feels irresponsible. Claire leaned against the counter. Maybe you are not letting go. Maybe you are making room. The words followed him home. That evening, Ethan opened the spare bedroom he had kept closed since retirement. Boxes from his service years filled the walls. He moved one to the hallway, then another. Ranger watched from the doorway. Ethan found a second dog bed in storage, one he had bought and never used because Ranger always slept near his room. He carried it to the porch and placed it where morning sunlight reached the boards. It was a small change. No visitor saw it. No doctor recorded it. But the next day, when Claire came by to return one of Thomas's photographs, Ranger led her directly to the new bed and lay down. Claire looked at Ethan. Making room. He handed her a cup of tea. Do not make it dramatic, he said. She sat beside Ranger. I would never. The smile she tried to hide told him otherwise. For several weeks, life found a rhythm. Ranger slept better after hospital visits. Ethan stayed for coffee with Claire and slowly began speaking about the people he missed, the responsibility he no longer carried, and the silence that had followed him home. Then he experienced another blackout in his kitchen. When awareness returned, he was sitting on the floor with Ranger stretched across his legs, preventing him from standing too quickly. 11 minutes had vanished. Ethan called Dr. Shah. The tests ruled out a tumor and seizure disorder. She told him the episodes were linked to untreated trauma, exhaustion, and his constant fear of Ranger's decline. You monitor every breath he takes, she said. You are trying to prevent a loss that cannot be controlled. Ethan finally agreed to therapy. Claire noticed when he emerged from the behavioral health elevator. Was it terrible? She asked. Yes. Will you go back? Yes. Then it was probably useful. Construction began near the old wing soon afterward. The hospital planned to demolish unsafe rooms behind the rehabilitation garden. Ranger became restless whenever workers approached the chained path. He ignored treats, scratched at a drainage grate, and repeatedly tested the air. Claire searched her father's boxes and found old maps showing a basement archive missing from current plans. Nolan refused to authorize entry because the structure was unstable and because the old program remained tied to his brother's injury. During one afternoon session, Ranger suddenly barked at the drainage grate. Warm air carried a sharp solvent odor into the garden. Maintenance discovered a forgotten ventilation duct connecting the occupied area to the sealed wing. Construction stopped, and engineers were sent inside. They found fire damage behind the wall of the old demonstration room. The electrical short had existed before the program closed. Thomas Bennett had been right. The dog that knocked Nolan's brother down had been alerting to burning insulation. Nolan read the report in silence. My brother said the dog kept looking at the wall, he admitted. I thought he was repeating an excuse. Claire answered, his injury was real. So was the warning. The engineers also located a dry basement room marked Companion Program Archive. Stabilizing the corridor would take weeks, but for the first time, the past was no longer sealed by doubt. Ranger seemed to know they were close. On hospital mornings, he waited at the door before Ethan touched the leash. In the garden, his attention remained fixed on the old wing, as though something inside was still calling him. On a humid Thursday in August, a severe thunderstorm warning covered the region. The hospital considered canceling the outdoor sessions, but Samuel was scheduled to demonstrate his first assisted steps for his visiting granddaughter. The sky was overcast but dry when Ethan and Ranger arrived. Claire met them at the garden entrance. You are limping, she said. Ethan looked down at Ranger. He is. I meant you. He had twisted his ankle stepping off the porch after another sleepless night. It is nothing. That phrase should be removed from the vocabulary of every veteran and every nurse. Ranger nudged them toward the garden. Samuel waited between parallel bars. His granddaughter Lily stood at the far end, holding a handmade sign that read Go Grandpa. She was 8 years old, missing one front tooth, and vibrating with hope. Ranger took his position beside the rail. Samuel gripped the bars. One step, Claire said. Do not perform for us. Just find your balance. Samuel pushed himself upright. His weak leg trembled. Ranger, watch without moving. The old veteran took one step. Lily covered her mouth. He took another. Thunder rolled in the distance. Ranger's ears flattened. Ethan touched his harness. Easy. Samuel took a third step and reached the end of the bars. Lily threw her arms around him. Everyone in the garden applauded. For one bright moment, even Nolan smiled. Then the hospital lights flickered. Ranger spun toward the old wing. A second thunderclap shook the windows. Rain struck the garden in a sudden sheet. Staff began moving patients indoors. Ranger pulled hard enough to wrench Ethan's injured ankle. Ranger, heel. The dog ignored him and barked toward the drainage grate. A sharp chemical smell rose into the wet air. The construction foreman shouted from behind the fence. Clear the area. We have a gas alarm in the service corridor. Nolan grabbed his radio. Evacuate the west rehabilitation wing. The automatic garden doors began to close as the power failed. Claire pushed Samuel's wheelchair through. Lily ran beside them. A gust of wind tore a section of orange fencing loose. It struck the ground with a metallic crack. Ranger bolted toward the opening. Ethan held the leash, but his bad ankle gave way. He fell to one knee. The leash slipped from his hand. Ranger! The German shepherd disappeared through the fence into the old courtyard. Ethan forced himself upright. Nolan blocked him. You cannot go in. My dog is in there. There is a gas leak. He went for a reason. So did the dog that hurt my brother. Ethan grabbed Nolan's jacket. Years of discipline held his fist at his side. Claire shouted from the doorway. Caleb is missing. Everyone turned. The young army medic had been in the garden minutes earlier. During the evacuation, staff assumed he entered with another group. His phone lay on a bench. Claire pointed through the fence. He told me he sometimes hides during storms. He panics when alarms sound. Ethan released Nolan. Ranger had not run from thunder. He had tracked Caleb. Nolan looked toward the old courtyard, rain streaming down his face. The gas alarm pulsed from inside the service corridor. I am calling the fire department, he said. They will. Take minutes, Ethan answered. You go in without breathing equipment, you may not come out. Ethan looked through the opening. Ranger's muddy paw prints crossed the courtyard toward the archive corridor. Claire stepped beside him. The old plans show a maintenance passage from the courtyard to the west stairwell. It may be above the leak. Nolan shook his head. Maybe. A bark sounded from inside. One bark. Pause. Two barks. Ranger's train location signal. Ethan's fear narrowed into decision. I am going. Nolan seized his arm. Your ankle is injured. You have dissociative episodes, and the building is unstable. You are exactly the wrong person. Ethan looked at Claire. She knew what he was asking before he spoke. Go with him, Ethan said. Claire's eyes widened. What? You know the old layout. Ranger trusts you. Caleb trusts you. And you? I will guide you from the plans. Every instinct in Ethan screamed to take control, to enter danger himself, to keep Ranger within sight. But the truth was merciless. Nolan was right. Ethan could become another person who needed rescue. Claire gripped his hand once. Keep talking to me. Nolan made the decision that changed all of them. He unlocked the emergency equipment cabinet, gave Claire a respirator, flashlight, and portable gas monitor, then took a second set for himself. I am going too, he said. You said the building was unsafe, Claire answered. It is. That is not a reason. No. Nolan tightened the mask over his face. It is a fact. They entered through the torn fence. Ethan stood beneath the hospital awning with the old floor plan spread across a wheelchair tray. Rain blurred the ink. He spoke through Nolan's radio. Cross the courtyard. Door on the north wall. Claire's flashlight beam vanished into the darkness. Ranger barked again, farther inside. The gas monitor began chirping. Nolan's voice came through the radio. Low reading here. Increasing near the basement stairs. Stay high, Ethan said. Maintenance passage should turn east before the stairs. Lightning flashed. The radio filled with static. Ethan pressed the button. Claire. No answer. His vision tightened. The hospital awning became the inside of a transport aircraft. Rain became rotor noise. The smell of wet concrete became fuel and dust. His fingers lost feeling. Then someone placed a hand on his shoulder. Samuel Larkin sat in his wheelchair beside him. Captain, the old veteran said. Where are your feet? Ethan could not answer. Look down. Ethan looked. Tell me what you see. Concrete. What color? Gray. What else? Your shoe. Ugly shoe. Very. Samuel smiled. Good. Stay here. Ethan drew one breath, then another. Ranger was inside. Claire was inside. Ethan could not help them by disappearing into memory. He pressed the radio. Claire, report. Static. Then her voice. We found the passage. There is a collapse ahead. Ranger went through a gap. Nolan added, too narrow for us. Ethan traced the map. The passage opens into the archive corridor. There should be another entrance from the stair landing. The gas reading is higher there. A faint sound came through the radio. Not a bark. A young man shouting. Caleb. Claire called. Ranger barked twice. Nolan said, he is on the other side of the collapse. Ethan studied the map. His eyes found an old ventilation shaft marked with Thomas Bennett's handwriting. Manual release at upper grate. Claire, look for a wall ladder near the west side. It reaches a ventilation grate. We see it. The shaft opens above the archive corridor. If the manual release still works, Ranger may be able to move Caleb toward cleaner air. Claire climbed. Metal groaned through the radio. Nolan said, gas reading rising. Keep the mask sealed, Ethan told him. I know. You asked for facts. This is not the time. It may be the only time you listen. For the first time, Nolan laughed. It was brief and strained, but human. Claire reached the grate. It is rusted. Use the bar in the emergency kit. Metal struck metal. Inside the corridor, Caleb's voice broke into a panic. I cannot move. The ceiling came down. Ranger's low whine answered him. Claire shouted through the grate. Caleb, listen to me. Is Ranger with you? Yes. Put your hand on his back. I cannot see. You do not need to see. Call his name. Ranger. The dog moved. Caleb. Gasped. Claire's voice became calm and rhythmic, the same voice that had reached a frightened young shepherd decades earlier. Feel him breathe. Match him. In when he breathes in. Out when he breathes out. The gas alarm chirped faster. Nolan said, We have less than 2 minutes before we retreat. Ethan's heart hammered. Claire, he said, the release. She struck the mechanism again. A deep metallic clang echoed through the radio. Air rushed through the shaft. Grate is open, she said. Caleb, Ethan called through Nolan's radio. Ranger will move toward the airflow. Stay low and follow him. My leg is trapped. Claire looked through the grate. Can you move the debris? No. Ranger began barking in a rapid pattern. Ethan knew it. Object alert. He found something, Ethan said. Tell Caleb to feel near Ranger's front paws. Caleb's breathing came hard through the open shaft. There is a pipe. Use it as leverage, Nolan said. Slide it under the debris. Do not lift straight up. Rotate. For years, Nolan had built his life around preventing the kind of moment that injured his brother. Now his voice guided another young man beside another alerting dog in a damaged building. Caleb grunted. The debris shifted. My leg is free. Ranger barked once. Follow him, Claire said. A shadow moved beneath the open grate. Ranger appeared first, nose high in the stream of fresh air. Caleb crawled behind him, one hand gripping the dog's harness. The corridor door at the stair landing was blocked by a fallen beam. Nolan and Claire pushed from their side. Caleb pushed from his. It did not move. Ethan searched the map. There is a service hatch into the archive room, he said. South wall, near the floor. Nolan found it. The hatch was barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Beyond it lay the sealed archive room, dry and untouched. But the room had no exterior exit. It connects to the courtyard through an equipment lift, Ethan said. Manual crank inside. Claire crawled through first. Nolan followed. Ranger led Caleb behind them. They entered a room filled with metal cabinets, boxes, old harnesses, and framed photographs stacked against the walls. On the far side, a rusted lift door stood beneath a hand crank. Nolan turned it. Nothing happened. Ranger limped to a cabinet and scratched at its base. Not now, Claire said. The dog scratched again. Nolan aimed his flashlight. A metal cable ran behind the cabinet to the lift mechanism. The cabinet is pinching it, he said. Together, they shifted the cabinet a few inches. The cable released. Nolan turned the crank. The lift door opened to rain and daylight. Hospital staff pulled Caleb out first. Then Claire. Then Nolan. Ranger did not emerge. Ethan dropped the map and moved toward the opening. Claire turned back. He was behind me. Smoke, thin but growing, curled from the old passage. Ranger! Ethan shouted. No response. His ankle failed when he stepped into the courtyard, but Samuel's grandson caught his arm. Ethan pushed forward anyway. Then Ranger appeared in the lift opening, dragging something by a leather strap. An old field case. The dog's front paws reached the wet pavement. His back legs buckled. Ethan fell beside him. Ranger's breathing was shallow. Soot darkened the gray fur around his muzzle. He still held the strap. You stubborn old soldier, Ethan whispered. Ranger released the case only when Claire touched his neck and said, You found it. Emergency crews placed an oxygen mask over Ranger's muzzle. Dr. Ortiz arrived from the animal clinic and rode with him to the emergency hospital. Ethan sat in the back of the vehicle with one hand on Ranger's chest. For the first time in all their years together, the dog's breathing did not steady Ethan. Ethan had to steady himself. Ranger survived. He had inhaled smoke and badly strained his injured leg, but Dr. Ortiz expected his lungs to clear. Ethan stayed beside the recovery kennel for 2 nights. Claire brought coffee. Samuel sent a card signed by the rehabilitation wing. Caleb arrived on crutches and stood outside the glass until Ranger lifted his head. Nolan came carrying the field case Ranger had dragged from the archive. The crew punctured a sealed solvent tank, he explained. The vapors entered the old ventilation system. Lightning stopped the fans. Ethan looked at Ranger. He knew. Nolan nodded. Yes. Inside the case were photographs, training records, and 2 letters sealed in plastic. One was addressed to the hospital director. Thomas Bennett had described the old demonstration in detail. He admitted that he should have stopped it when the dog repeatedly alerted toward the wall. He had allowed pressure to protect the program to become more important than listening. Nolan read the letter twice. My brother told the truth, he whispered. So did my father, Claire said. The truth did not erase the broken arm or the years of resentment. It made room for both griefs to exist without turning either man into a villain. The second letter was addressed to the handler R17 Chooses. Ethan broke the seal. Thomas wrote that Ranger was intelligent, disciplined, and unusually sensitive to human distress. He warned that the dog might disobey when obedience conflicted with danger. He explained that loud metal, electrical odors, and enclosed spaces could return Ranger to the day adults failed to listen. Then Claire read the final lines aloud. One day, his work will end. His purpose will not. He will still search for the person who needs him most. Sometimes that person will be a stranger. Sometimes it will be you. I hope his handler understands that strength is not proven by standing alone. It is proven by knowing when to stay, when to lead, and when to let another heart stand beside yours. Ethan sat on the floor beside Ranger's kennel and placed his hand through the opening. You found the letter, he whispered. Ranger rested his muzzle across Ethan's wrist. Ethan did not hide his tears when Claire sat beside him. The investigation cleared Thomas Bennett's account and acknowledged the failures that ended the original companion program. At Nolan's request, the report also preserved Daniel Pierce's statement and injury. Nobody rewrote the past into a simple victory. The hospital approved a new pilot program for retired working dogs and veterans in rehabilitation. Every dog would receive medical screening and behavioral evaluation. Every handler would receive support. Nolan added one rule. An alert from a trained animal had to be assessed before it could be dismissed as disruption. Claire became clinical coordinator. Dr. Ortiz supervised canine health. Nolan managed safety. Ethan resisted a formal role until Claire said, You understand handlers, and you understand what retirement takes from a working dog. I understand, Ranger. Start there. Ranger placed one paw on Ethan's boot. Ethan accepted. 6 weeks after the rescue, Ranger returned to the garden. Samuel stood with a cane. Caleb held the repaired leather strap from the field case. Angela waited with the book she had finally begun reading in group therapy. Lily carried a handmade sign that read Welcome Home, Ranger. The German shepherd paused at the gate, tense beneath the attention. Ethan knelt. You do not owe anyone a performance. Claire stood beside him. We can leave. Ranger looked from Ethan to Claire, then towards Samuel, who had taken one careful step forward. He entered. Nobody rushed him. Nolan unveiled a plaque beside the restored path. For every person and every animal whose warning was once misunderstood. May we learn to listen before fear decides the story. Below it were 3 names. Thomas Bennett, Daniel Pierce, Ranger, R17. The program grew slowly. Some dogs were not suited for hospital work. Some veterans feared animals. No connection was forced. Ranger's stamina decreased, but his value did not. He rested on a padded bed while veterans came to him. A young man named Noah once complained that Ranger could lie down while everyone called him brave. Ethan explained that the dog had spent his life moving faster than everyone and now needed a ramp to enter the truck. He hates the ramp, Ethan said. He uses it because getting somewhere matters more than how he looks getting there. Ranger rose, picked up Noah's cane by its padded handle, and laid it across his knees. For the first time in weeks, Noah laughed. Ethan kept attending therapy. The blackouts became rare. He still checked exits and woke before dawn, but he learned to recognize when memory was pulling him away. He learned that asking for help did not erase the years he had spent helping others. Claire became part of his ordinary life through coffee, porch dinners, and slow Sunday walks. Ranger moved his bed into the hallway between them whenever she stayed late, as though guarding a family neither human had been brave enough to name. Then, in early spring, Dr. Ortiz found cancer near Ranger's spleen. Surgery might extend his life, but his age and heart made it dangerous. Without it, he had weeks or perhaps a few months. What would you do? Ethan asked. I would measure his life by comfort, Lena answered, not by my fear of losing him. Ethan chose comfort care. He took Ranger to the river where the dog had learned to swim. They sat outside the airfield where Ethan's team once trained. They returned to the hospital every Tuesday, though some visits lasted only minutes. Samuel came with the older shepherd mix he had adopted. Caleb brought his newborn daughter and placed her tiny socked foot against Ranger's paw. Noah walked 3 steps without his cane, then used it again without shame. Nolan brought a photograph of Daniel at 19 beside the dog from the old demonstration. Ranger sniffed the frame and lay down. Claire read the baseball article one final time. One more morning, Ranger could not stand. Ethan carried him to a blanket beneath the maple tree at home. Claire sat on one side. Dr. Ortiz knelt on the other. Ethan held Ranger's head in his lap. For years, he had believed their bond meant neither would leave the other behind. Now love required a different promise. You do not have to stay for me, he whispered. Ranger opened his eyes. Claire read Thomas Bennett's final words. Strength is proven by knowing when to stay, when to lead, and when to let another heart stand beside yours. Ranger's breathing slowed beneath Ethan's hand. No alarm sounded. No one applauded. The German shepherd who had spent his life listening to hearts left in perfect quiet, surrounded by the people he had taught to listen. Grief arrived as an empty bowl, a leash beside the door, and silence at 2 in the morning. Ethan stopped visiting the hospital. He ignored messages and told himself he needed time, but isolation slowly became the same bunker Ranger had once pulled him from. One rainy afternoon, Nolan came to the house carrying Ranger's worn harness. The first dog for the expanded program arrived today, he said. A retired police shepherd named Atlas. He refuses to enter the garden. Ethan looked at the harness. Claire has been sitting outside with him for 2 hours, Nolan added. Nobody is asking you to replace Ranger. He already did the work. We are asking you not to abandon it. The next morning, Ethan returned. Claire sat outside the gate reading from a magazine. Atlas lay 10 feet away, his body turned toward the parking lot. His handler had died, and every new place made him search for someone who would not return. Claire moved her coffee to make room. Ethan sat beside her and placed Ranger's harness on the ground. For 30 minutes, nobody tried to touch Atlas. Then the shepherd rose, crossed half the distance, and sniffed the leather. He did not choose Ethan. He did not become calm. He stayed. It was enough for the first day. A year later, the restored courtyard opened as the listening garden. The archive became a small history center, and the field case Ranger carried from the smoke rested beneath glass. At the entrance, the original plaque honored Thomas, Daniel, and R. 17. A second inscription read, "Listen to the warning. Respect the silence. Make room for the truth." Veterans entered with dogs, wheelchairs, canes, prosthetic limbs, scars, fear, stubbornness, and hope. Nobody was required to inspire anyone. Nobody was asked to heal on schedule. Claire led the clinical team. Nolan greeted each handler. Ethan taught new staff beneath the maple trees. On the anniversary of the storm, Ethan walked alone to the old bench carrying Ranger's collar. He had once believed Ranger's greatest act was saving lives in dangerous places. Then he believed it was finding Samuel, rescuing Caleb, or carrying the lost letter from the archive. Now he understood that Ranger's greatest act had been patient repetition. Stay, notice, alert, return. He had done it until people learned to do it for one another. Claire approached with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him. A new patient entered the garden with his daughter and a nervous young German shepherd. The dog stopped at the gate. "He is scared," the girl whispered. Ethan lowered himself slowly, turned sideways, and looked away from the dog. "Scared does not mean dangerous," he said. "It means we give him time." Claire opened an old magazine. In 1998, she began. A rookie shortstop walked into spring training carrying 2 gloves and no guarantee he would make the team. The young shepherd listened. The world had not replaced Ranger. It had learned from him. In the garden where fear had once closed every door, another misunderstood heart took one careful step forward. Ethan reached for Claire's hand, and the dog took another. If Ranger's journey stayed with you, share what loyalty and second chances mean in your own life. Subscribe for more stories honoring the courage, intelligence, and quiet devotion of extraordinary K9S.